Thank you, Monique, and thank you to the Thomson Reuters Foundation and the International Herald Tribune for bringing us all here together, stakeholders in so many of the issues that have been discussed already today and will continue on during the course of this conference. We live in a time of instant communication when yesterday's news may as well be ancient history, and particularly some in the Western media for whom this global attention deficit is now focusing on the Arab Spring, are assuming that the popular uprisings should have achieved their goals by now, and if not, have failed, especially in the areas of democracy and women's rights, both seen as under threat by the rise to political power of Islamist parties. But the idea of an endangered revolution may be based on some misperceptions about revolutions, Islam, and attitudes in the Arab world. Revolutions, as sudden as they sound, rarely produce results immediately. Momentum builds over time, beginning with a desire for change and reaching a tipping point, but it can take years or generations for the changes to take root. Women have participated in revolutions since time immemorial, but it can take even longer for them to reap the benefits. Few examples. The American Revolution began with 8 years of war and did not produce a constitution for 5 more. American women did not get the right to vote until 1920. The French Revolution arguably took 80 years. Women activists, despite their active role, were often executed, committed to insane asylums, or publicly humiliated, and they could not vote until 1944. The Russian Revolution produced 6 years of civil war, and then Stalin, etc., and while Russian women gained the vote in 1917, they faced pervasive discrimination up through the fall of communism. And it begins to look as if, in many cases, World War I and World War II come to mind. Women do not gain equality until some cataclysm decimates the male population. One would hope that men would be slightly easier to persuade than that. Now, the Middle East experienced perhaps more than its fair share of political upheavals. In the modern era, with the Great Arab Revolt against Ottoman occupation in 1916, and then 3 decades later against the European colonizing powers to whom they had first appealed for help. Egypt began its fight for independence in 1919, overthrew its king in 1952, and granted women's suffrage in 1956. After years of agitation by feminists, from the male women's rights champion Qasim Amin in the late 19th century to Huda Sharawi and the Women's Union in the 20th. And you will hear more about Egypt from our panelists coming up. And Libya is another story, and Ala Morabit will update you as well in the panel coming up. But it appears again that women's rights are once again at risk, even as revolution progresses. Iran became an Islamic republic in 1979, as you may have heard earlier from Shireen, and approved a democratic, theocratic hybrid constitution relatively quickly. But I'm sure she updated you earlier on the progress or lack thereof that has been made. Egypt, the first country in the Arab region to elect women to parliament, ultimately included no women in the committee that drafted the new constitution. And the percentage of women legislators has dropped from 12% to 2% due to the abolition of quotas. The final draft has raised concerns about its safeguarding of rights and liberties, which Dina Wahab will no doubt address shortly. Still, an historical perspective argues, I believe, against summary judgment or giving up on the process too soon. Haste can have its own drawbacks, as the current constitutional crisis in Egypt is demonstrating. Even as some groups attempt to turn back the clock on Arab women's rights using religious justifications, Islam should not be considered the source of misogyny and women's oppression in the region. 7th century Islam was itself a revolution, particularly with regards to women's rights. It fought practices such as female infanticide, granted women indisputable rights, such as the equal right to education, to own and inherit property, to conduct business, and not to be coerced into marriage, based on the equality of men and women before God, when the rest of the world considered women chattel. As the Holy Quran says, I waste not the labor of any that labors among you, be you male or female. The one of you is as the other. Traditions in Muslim countries that are now considered coercive by the West are not mandated in the Quran, but are holdovers largely from ancient pre-Islamic cultures and patriarchal tribal customs. As historians Qasim Amin and Samiha Sidhum put it, if there were any religion which could have had power and influence over local traditions, then Muslim women today should have been at the forefront of free women on earth. In attempting to address misogyny in the Arab world, it is important to differentiate Islam from oppression. In fact, Islam can and should be appealed to as a source for women's empowerment, with those who abuse women censured for going against the teachings of the Prophet. As human rights activist Yara Salam puts it, if they talk to us in Sharia, we'll talk to them in Sharia. There are plenty of interpretations which will not set us back. Attempts to shame ill treatment of women should not be conflated with attacks on Islam or cultural principles such as modesty, piety, and the importance of the family that help form the collective identity of Arabs. And we must encourage and amplify the voices of moderate, knowledgeable, and authentic Muslim scholars and practitioners. So does the rise of political Islam pose a danger to women's rights? Statistics and opinion polls provide interesting insights. World Economic Forum gender equality ratings in the region have actually increased, but barely, in the past 2 years, by 1.2%, though we're still the lowest ranked region in the world. The exception was a 5.3% drop in Syria, demonstrating, and you saw it in the film, that the greatest threat to women's advancement may not be religious conservatism, but war, certainly one of the greatest threats. In last summer's Gallup poll taken in Egypt, Syria, Bahrain, Tunisia, Yemen, and Libya, in general, women's and men's attitudes tended to be similar on a host of issues, from the right to equal education, supported by more than 80% of both genders in all countries, to their citing economic and security issues as the most important to their families. Gallup found few differences in support for women's rights between religious and non-religious people, and women tended to consider themselves more spiritual than did men, which they correlated very highly with their happiness. But that had no impact on their sense of deserved rights. Arab men and women, in fact, show remarkable consistency within their countries, with majorities of up to 90% of both sexes thinking that women should have the same legal rights as men. The polls found that there is no link between men or women's support for Sharia as the source of legislation and antagonism to women's rights, though we have to acknowledge here that the often problematic wide open space for interpretation and implementation of laws. The primary danger to women's advancement is not religious, but economic and social, although these motives often hide behind a religious veneer. The Gallup report stresses that those working for greater gender equality in the Arab world would do well to focus on overall human development, allowing Arab women's own priorities to guide these efforts. This benefits everyone. According to the IMF, allowing women to take their rightful place as half of a country's labor force, give or take, can radically increase GDP, which I've seen in my own grassroots development work. Their work promotes stability by reducing hunger and poverty, improving maternal, child, and general health and education, and allowing their voices to be heard in local and national decision-making. We need to empower men economically as well. The polls show that men seem most open to the idea of women's rights when they are feeling most secure themselves. Men's support for women's employment appears to depend not on religious beliefs, but on men's employment, level of education, and their country's scores on the Human Development Index. Governing parties will have to become more pragmatic and less ideological, not less faithful, to effectively address critical economic challenges which lie in front of them. And this will rely on increasing participation and productivity of women. No development strategy that marginalizes women can succeed. To stifle their rights, hamper their work, and deny their contributions not only demeans them, but prevents progress. Throughout history, women have traditionally been the very last to benefit from revolutions. While they have always been major participants in the protests, they've been left or pushed behind when the time comes to build the new society the revolution started. This does not mean the revolution has failed. It means it is not finished. Rather than viewing with preconceived alarm the complex relationship of women revolution and Islam, those outside the culture need to listen to the women themselves, which you'll have an opportunity to, and trust the political, religious, and personal choices they make. Men and women in the Arab region believe in just laws and equal opportunities, and with support, they complete the revolutions they began. And citizens' new sense of empowerment and grassroots youth activism, with its equal access to new media, have created a dynamic new landscape for change and accountability. Revolutions are messy. They take time. They ultimately require negotiation and compromise. Revolutions in the Middle East are taking place in real time as we speak, and I think it is far too soon to give them up for lost. As Rami Khouri puts it, the historic thing about the Arab states experiencing these transitions is not that Islamists are dominating. Rather, it's that politics are happening, that different ideological viewpoints are competing peacefully and politically and publicly to shape a new political order. When anyone tries to monopolize power now, others in society push back and prevent it, preferring instead a governance system anchored in populist legitimacy of the citizenry rather than dominant party overreach. And the possibility of that process is itself revolutionary. Thank you.